Hi, everybody, and welcome to ZTV Live. Today's Wednesday, June 3rd. I'm Susan Mulligan Fleischman, and I'm really happy to be here with you tonight. My guest is Deirdre Taylor, a nurse here in Alexandria who answered a calling to serve on the COVID frontlines in New York City for 2 months. Just wait till you hear her stories. Then tomorrow night, I'll be joined by Sharif El-Sheikh and Casey Hogan, who will talk about their community meal donation and delivery partnership, Toast and Taste. But before we get to Deirdre, I'd like you to know that tonight's edition of ZTV Live is brought to you in part by the Italian Place on Wythe Street in Old Town. This women-owned small business is where you want to place an order for your favorite authentic Italian specialties like pizza, pasta dishes, fresh Italian subs, and Italian wines. Visit theitalianplace.com and see their dinner specials, pizza kits, and more. And mention the Zebra for 15% off your order. Tonight's show is also brought to you by Cafe 44 on the Potomac in North Old Town. This stylish American eatery offers a spectacular view from its dining balcony, delicious food, and a warm and welcoming staff. Check out the menu online at cafe44.com or download their mobile app for an even easier ordering. Mention the Zebra for $4 curbside cocktails. And ZTV Live is also sponsored by Tempo Restaurant, Alexandria's best-kept secret on Duke Street in the West End. Specializing in Northern Italian and French cuisine, award-winning Tempo is well known for its delectable seafood and tantalizing desserts. Visit temporestaurant.com to see their menu, including beer and wine to go. Mention the Zebra for 10% off meals on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. A big thank you to all of our sponsors. If you'd like to sponsor ZTV Live, please let us know by sending an email to editor@thezebra.org. In local news today, Delray's first Thursday on June 4th, tomorrow, is canceled as Alexandrians honor George Floyd, the African-American man who died last week in Minneapolis police custody. There will be a vigil at the Charles Houston Recreation Center tomorrow evening with prayer, a moment of silence, and remarks from community leaders. Face masks are encouraged. The Delray Business Association urges the community to join the vigil or honor Floyd through other peaceful means. The food drive for Blessings in a Backpack will continue. In fact, Sue Kowalski, president of the DRBA, has neighborhood signs available for those who would like one. Promoting spread kindness and build community. The signs are available for the taking at 403 East Custis Avenue in Delray. A peace walk is in the works for this Saturday in Alexandria. Teen siblings Caden and Kennedy Brandon are the organizers of the event, taking place this Saturday, June 6th from 5 to 8 p.m. at Ewald Park on Duke Street at Wheeler Avenue. They picked the park by the police station on purpose because they want to bring a message of peace and let people know it's still okay to call the police. Kennedy and Caden have been community-minded for years and started their nonprofit foundation, Kennedy's Corner, when they were only 9 and 10 years old. The public is invited to the Alexandria Peace Walk and encouraged to wear blue, the color for peace. Walkers are asked to bring posters, wear masks, and stay 6 feet apart. Above all, walkers are asked to bring their peaceful spirits. See thezebra.org for more information on this story. And in public health news today, the Virginia Department of Health reported that new cases for the coronavirus have been declining, an important metric to meet in reopening businesses. The 7-day rate of positive tests for the state is 11% right now, down from 2 weeks ago when the rate stood at almost 15%. Data shows most cases are occurring at adults between the ages of 20 and 69, with people in their 40s accounting for the largest percentage of cases. Adults over the age of 70 account for the highest percentage of deaths, sadly. Stay safe, wear a mask, and keep your distance. And now, I'm so pleased to welcome our special guest tonight, Deirdre Taylor, to our show. I actually have Renee Gage, a mutual friend and photographer and a former guest on ZTV Live, to thank for bringing Deirdre to my attention. This was back in April when Deirdre was traveling up to New York to work as a nurse. I followed Deirdre's blog and her stories, and I'm thrilled that she's joined us on the show tonight. So hello and welcome to ZTV Live, Deirdre Taylor.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I think a lot of people around here know your story, but I think it's a story worth telling to a lot of people. So why don't we start at the beginning, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to become a nurse in Alexandria?
Sure. So I was born in New York City, grew up in Connecticut, and ended up spending about 12 years in the Connecticut Army National Guard. I met my husband while serving on active duty. We met in flight school for the Army. And after being in a long distance relationship for a few years, we realized that we wanted to get married and start a family. And so I left the military and needed to find another career that would be portable and that would still allow me to feel like I was serving my community. And that's what drew me to nursing. So I went to nursing school while we were stationed in Savannah, Georgia, and started my nursing career off working in level 1 trauma center down there. Eventually transferred. My husband got assigned to the Pentagon initially and worked over at Inova Fairfax in the emergency department there for several years. And then most recently took a job about a little over a year ago working in a post-anesthesia care unit at Inova Mount Vernon. Yeah, so I had been out of the emergency department for about a year when all of this had started.
Mm-hmm. Well, it must be like riding a bicycle. Is it kind of getting right back into that more frenetic pace than what you had been working in for the past year?
It is, absolutely. But yeah, when the COVID crisis, started to unfold, I was watching the news up in New York City and saw just how overrun the hospitals were, and could empathize with the nurses that were battling it on the front line. They obviously, there weren't enough nurses in the ICUs. There weren't enough nurses in the emergency department to handle the, massive influx of critically ill patients that they were seeing. And so we had canceled all elective surgeries at the time here in Virginia and had not really seen the influx of COVID patients at that point. So I really kind of felt like I was a kid on the sidelines, with the skills to help, but, ready to be put in. I knew I could help and was drawn to New York.
Did it slowly dawn on you like, oh, maybe I can do this? Or were you like, oh my gosh, I need to go up to New York now? It must have been. I mean, you have 2 children and a husband and a life here, so it's kind of hard to pick up and leave for 2 months.
Yeah, I will say it all happened very fast. I had a friend who had made the decision to go to New York, who I reached out with. I had never taken a travel nurse assignment before, but she worked for a company that she'd been really happy with and that I knew I could trust. And so I reached out to her and found out, more information. And normally taking a travel assignment or working out of state is quite a lengthy process, but because of the urgency and the need, a lot of the things that normally, make things take a long time were being waived. So my Virginia nursing license was suddenly good in New York. I didn't have to go through the whole application process. And so I spoke with a recruiter, and within a matter of hours had an offer from NYU Langone in Brooklyn.
Wow.
So we sat down as a family. It wasn't, a decision that was made in a box. There was no way I was going to be able to leave my family without the support of my husband and my kids. I mean, it was a huge sacrifice on their part as well.
Yeah, it really was. What was the reaction of your children? I'm sure your husband, I mean, it sounds like you guys have a wonderful relationship, and I'm sure he was supportive, but I would almost think it would be a little harder to leave your children.
Absolutely. I think I was torn. I realized that if I was working locally, I would be coming home every night and exposing my family to the virus. And so part of me felt almost safer by going to New York because I was able to, in a way, self-isolate and, not expose my husband or my children to this virus if I was going to be, working with COVID patients. But leaving my kids was really hard. I made the decision in the beginning of April. Both of my kids had birthdays coming up. My daughter Annabelle turned 8. My son Owen turned 10. I was going to be missing Easter and Mother's Day. And
oh my gosh.
And so
Boom,
it was
boom,
a
boom.
lot.
So many things. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I sat both kids down and had, a heart-to-heart talk with both of them. And in all honesty, their responses just blew me away. They both recognized that this was going to be kind of an unusual birthday, as it was. School had been canceled. Sports had already been canceled at that point. My husband was working from home, as were most people in Northern Virginia at the time. And I mentioned it to my son and was really shocked by his response. I mean, he really didn't even hesitate. He looked at me and said, "Mom, you're a nurse and they need nurses in New York, and there's people that are sick and you can help them. And it seems really silly for you to stay home just to be here to help me blow out, candles on a birthday cake when you could go to New York and help save people's lives."
Wow. What a kid. That's awesome.
Yeah. And my daughter was a little bit more hesitant at first, and I think it's to be expected. Having a parent leave for 8 weeks is a long time.
Sure, of course.
We are a military family, so my kids have experienced deployments in the past. My husband has deployed to Afghanistan and Jordan, and so they're familiar with having a parent gone. But they also know that with new technology and things like FaceTime, we can still communicate on a daily basis. And I was able to keep in touch with them. So
that's great.
She came around and saw the big picture, and they both made me really, really proud. And the community stepped up big time.
Yeah, we have
really
an amazing neighborhood down here in Alexandria. So that must have, and knowing that you were leaving them, obviously that your husband was home working, that made it a lot easier. But also just knowing how special and close-knit this neighborhood really is, made it so much easier for you to go with a little bit more of a little peace of mind.
Yeah, again, it happened very, very quickly. I kind of made the decision, and then from the time I made the decision to the day that I showed up at the hospital for my first day was less than a week. So,
oh my gosh.
I mean, it really snowballed very quickly. My neighbors, it kind of trickled out. I held it close for a few days because I really wasn't trying to have a whole lot of attention, just trying to soak up the last few days with the family. But my neighbors really, their support was unparalleled. My neighbor Tina put together birthday parades for my kids. Everyone asked what I needed or what they could do while I was gone, and I just asked, please make my kids feel special on their birthday.
Yeah.
And the entire community came out. There were dozens of cars that drove by with signs and inflatable T-Rexes and pink unicorns and people playing trombones in the back of pickup trucks and homemade signs and cards. And they really felt the love that I felt from the neighborhood as well.
Wow, that's really how wonderful, how heartwarming for them, and feeling you and all of that as well. So knowing that, your friends and your family, that you guys are also connected, must have been a nice big mutual hug for them. So, so then off you go up to New York, and it must have. Did it feel like you were landed on a movie set or in another planet? The streets were empty, and yet you had this, work from hell conditions at the hospital. How did that go?
Yeah, it was definitely a strange time to be in New York, especially initially. I remember driving up on the Jersey Turnpike and being one of the only cars on the road. I mean, we've made the drive up to New York so many times, and normally it's bumper to bumper traffic.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was driving up in rush hour, and there literally wasn't a car in sight going in either direction. So I did kind of feel like I was driving into the apocalypse.
Yeah, that's eerie. I mean, that never happens. Not even at 2 a.m. It's not like that.
Yeah, it was definitely kind of an ominous feeling, but I rented a great little studio apartment over in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and had kind of a nice retreat to come home to. But when I first showed up, the hospital was just as bad as all the stories you've seen on TV. I will say that I have nothing but great things to say for the staff at NYU Langone in Brooklyn. I mean, I really felt like they did everything within their power to not only keep patients safe, but to keep staff safe. But
great.
the first week or two were absolutely overwhelming. So
I can imagine, and that's when the curve was just going up, 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 up. That first week in April.
Yeah, the staff at NYU had been working in some pretty difficult conditions for a solid month. They all kind of said that the patient census was pretty normal, and then one day they just had a massive influx of super sick patients, and patients were rolling in on ambulances in respiratory distress, and they would arrest within like 30 minutes. And so, just stop breathing or the hearts would stop. And very, very quickly, all of the ICU beds in the hospital filled up. And so the ER, holds all of those patients. So you can't put 2 ICU patients in a room, upstairs on the floor. And so what happens is that when the ICUs fill up, the emergency department ends up boarding all of those patients. And so when I arrived, every single room in the emergency department was filled with an ICU level patient. Most of them were intubated. We had patients lined up on stretchers in the hallways. Most of them needed, oxygen support. Normally, when you have a patient on a stretcher, you put them on a portable oxygen tank, but the oxygen tanks were running out because these patients were laying on stretchers for, some more than a week waiting for beds upstairs. So we would have oxygen tubing that would run from the walls and we would suspend it using IV poles so that you could still slide stretchers and get through the hallway. It was very much like a war zone.
Yeah, no kidding.
But a week after I got there, NYU hired a ton of travel nurses to come support the emergency room and the, ICUs and the med-surg units. And they hired a bunch of extra respiratory therapists. And because of that and how proactive they were, they moved a lot of patients out of the hospital that didn't need to be there into other facilities. Within about a week and a half of me showing up, there was another massive influx of ICU nurses, and they were able to open 2 additional intensive care units and completely staff them. And so that made a tremendous impact on the emergency department because we were able to move along all those patients that had been boarding in the ER, and it really kind of decompressed the emergency department and allowed us to breathe. But we were still seeing, a tremendous amount of really sick patients just rolling in by ambulance. That we were still caring for. So it took a few weeks for everything to slow down. But, the staff, the regular emergency department staff at Brooklyn were just so grateful for all the travel nurses that came in to just, help lighten their load.
Just to show you how crucial nurses are in that environment, and how, it must have felt pretty gratifying to be able to help.
It was. I definitely felt like we made a difference, and that alone is pretty gratifying.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Being at home and, what can we do? What can we do? And you were able to really do something. So that's really wonderful. What did you ever think, like, oh my gosh, what have I done? In the beginning, probably once you got there, you got a little bit more into it, but there had to be a little bit of second guessing. Did you have any of that?
I don't know that I second guessed, but it certainly got real very quickly.
Yeah.
Okay. There really wasn't a whole lot of time for orientation. We had one day where we were kind of in an auditorium where we got a quick rundown of here's the type of pumps we use. Here's a passcode so that you can use this machine or that machine. And the first day on the unit working in the emergency room, I was paired up with another nurse to kind of show me around, but she had a really heavy patient load. And so my very first shift, I was taking care of an ICU level patient who had something like 9 different drips hanging that all needed to be titrated. And I hadn't worked in the emergency room in over a year. And typically we don't hold, ideally when you're an ER nurse, when you have a really sick, unstable patient that's critically ill, we stabilize them and we ship them up to the ICU. We are not generally caring for those patients for hours on end. And so
right.
I realized
sure.
that, I realized that this was real. And, but I was happy that it all came back really quickly.
Yeah.
So it is in a way just kind of like riding a bike, but
yeah, a little more intense and a little more pressure, but yeah, just like riding a bike. And then here you are back in New York. How, well, we do have a question actually from the audience. Were you worried about catching the virus yourself? You did mention that they were very good at protecting you, but did you have that concern?
I wasn't overly concerned that if I got the virus, I would get really sick. I'm a runner. I've got good lungs, and I don't really have any comorbidities. I don't have any health problems. But I was, relieved as soon as I got to the hospital. The very first thing that the staff at NYU did was they fit tested us for N95 masks to make sure that, we had the proper fit, that we knew our size, and they assured us that we would have the proper PPE, and there was never a time where I didn't have the proper gear. So
that's good.
From the day I showed up, I was very, very careful. And I would wear an N95 mask. I wore goggles, a face shield, and then we would wear gowns, on top of our scrubs. The hospital issued us scrubs, so I would change as soon as I got to the hospital, put on hospital scrubs, and then before I left, I changed out of those scrubs and gave them back where they were laundered by the hospital. And so, I was able to feel like I felt like I was able to leave most of the germs,
that's
there.
Good. Yeah. And then at least you don't have that personal worry and stress that can really be so kind of tough to go about your day if you're worried about something. So nice that they had taken all those steps and you were taking the steps to protect yourself that way. And I know that you worked, long shifts, multiple shifts in a row, but then you did have some time off. What did you do to fill your time off? You didn't have any husband or children with you, and there really wasn't a lot going on in New York at the time because everything was really shut down. So what did you do on your time off?
Yeah, so I worked nights, which I haven't done in a very, very long time. I worked 4 12-hour shifts. So I would show up at the hospital at 7 p.m. and I would get off at 7:30 in the morning and do my best to sleep during the day. But I did use the time to just kind of reflect. I think as a mother of 2 kids, it's very rare to have time to yourself, when I didn't have a household to run. I wasn't having to prepare meals and snacks or homeschool my kids.
Yeah, it's almost like culture shock. I mean, you're just going from one extreme to the other almost.
Yeah, so I did, I love photography. When I had a chance, I would go out and take some pictures. I tried to kind of dive into the creative side. I love to paint and draw and write. And so when I had free time, I tried to kind of use those outlets to fill my time.
That's great. And those are all so fulfilling if you can kind of empty and compartmentalize what's going on and be able to fulfill your and feed those creative juices. So that's great. And I've seen some of your those photographs, and they're just really beautiful. I mean, New York is a photogenic city anyway, but your pictures are just, they were just really, really great. And your blog too, your writing was so honest and real. It was just really interesting to read, very thoughtful, poignant. But that's for another conversation. I could talk to you about.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, for your blog posts were wonderful. Now there was a photograph that I loved, and it was of your coworkers all holding up these beautiful lay and go bags.
Yes.
Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So before I left, my sweet neighbors, Amy and Adam Fizzackerly, who are the owners and founders of a company called Lay and Go, called me and said, please, before you leave, we've got some stuff we want to give you before you head up to New York. And so literally as I was driving out of the neighborhood, I swung by their house. They lived just around the corner from me, and they loaded me up with a few cases of their cosmetic bags and asked me to just hand them out to people on the front lines, and honestly didn't ask for anything in return. And it was one of the best parts of my night. In the very beginning, those first couple shifts were really hard. I mean, especially the staff in New York who had been doing that day in and day out, and just nurses are used to seeing death, but it was the amount of death we were seeing. I mean, patients were coding left and right, to the point where we would normally in the emergency room, do postmortem care on our own patients, and we put patients in body bags and we transport them to the morgue ourselves. But there were so many patients dying that they had to have special teams to come and come down and do that for us. And so when I say that, the nurses were tired and just emotionally distraught, those first weeks were really rough. And I had the opportunity to just bring a smile to a lot of their faces by just handing them a cosmetic bag at the end of the shift and saying, you don't owe me anything for this. My sweet neighbors just wanted me to hand these out. And, people would go home thinking about the new cosmetic bag that they just received, instead of, some of the tougher things that they had dealt with that night. And so I would take pictures and just send them back to Amy and Adam, so they knew I wasn't like selling them on the corner in Chinatown. I was actually handing them out to people on the front lines. And they were so touched with, all the photos that I sent them that they sent me another case. And so I really had the opportunity to hand them out the entire time I was there, and they really brought a lot of smiles to a lot of people's faces. And I didn't just give them out to nurses. I handed them out to the building services staff who, they go in and clean the rooms after each patient. They're just as much of the front line. I feel like they're the forgotten ones who don't get nearly as much credit as they do. But, the building services crew, the respiratory therapists, the x-ray techs, the doctors, the nurses. I mean,
so many.
It's a whole team.
Team is so big. Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, I just think that's great. And Amy and Adam Frizzackerly are very generous with their product, and it's such a unique, innovative product. And it's layandgo.com, LAYNGO.com. If you're interested in these bags, I highly recommend them. And I saw on their website that they put all your photographs of the people that you had given the bags to is on the front page of their website. So it's really wonderful to see all these people in all the medical gear with these huge faces holding their new bags. So that's really,
you may not be able to see the smiles behind everyone's masks, but I can assure you they were smiling.
They really look, but I could see, you can tell, in the eyes. I mean, everybody looked pretty pleased with their new loot. So
absolutely,
way to go, Fizzackerly's and Lay and Go. That was a really wonderful addition. So I know that you have a meaningful connection because you grew up in New York City and you were there when you were very little, but something pretty traumatic happened to you when you were in New York when you were 4 years old. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So I was involved in a fire when I had just turned 4, actually. It happened in December of 1983. And the rescue ended up on the front page of the New York Daily News. I think there was a write-up in the New York Times back then too. But yeah, big fire in our loft in Soho. We had a loft up on the 6th floor. Back then it was just industrial space. My parents were artists. We did not have a multi-million-dollar loft.
No.
But they are now. It's a different time. But the firefighters just happened to be across the street checking the water pipes. The fire hadn't actually been called in at this point. And somebody in the building had come running outside and noticed the fire truck and got the attention of the crew and said that, I think there's a fire upstairs and I think there's people inside.
Wow.
And because they were just out checking water lines, none of them actually had their fire gear on them. And there was a firefighter by the name of Eugene Pugliese, and he went running up the building. They took the elevator up to the 5th floor, and then he went up the last flight of stairs with he just grabbed his hard hat and an axe and managed to rescue us. My mother was involved in the fire as well. He came across her first and got her to safely, and she was just yelling, "My baby, my baby." And he ended up entering a smaller room within the loft that was completely filled with smoke. He said at one point he had to run to the window just to get a breath of fresh air. Wow. Before he crawled on his hands and knees and came up upon my body. At that point, It sounds like I was unconscious, and he ended up giving me mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and I started crying and breathing again, and he got me downstairs and put me on a respirator. But yeah, that's
wow. That's crazy. Now, I mean, obviously you were unconscious when he found you and he saved your life. Do you remember any of that? Do you remember it? I mean, 4 years old is so young. I can.
I don't remember much. There's bits and pieces that maybe I remember. Maybe I've just kind of pieced together over
stories.
The years.
Yeah,
it's hard to say.
Mm-hmm. But you always saved that newspaper article, right?
Yeah, so the article from the Daily News has been in my scrapbook since I can remember. And so I've always, known that I was given the second chance on life. I always knew that I had been rescued by a firefighter, and I always had a picture of the firefighter that saved me, because both of our pictures made the front page of that news story that year.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And so that was kind of in the back of your mind when you went up to New York that, hey, maybe I can finally look this guy up. You had Googled him, right? But you couldn't really find him before that?
I've thought about him at different times over my life, throughout the years, especially, when September 11th happened, my heart kind of sunk, and I always wondered if, he had made it through September 11th, because so many firefighters didn't that day.
Right.
And I had put his name in Google searches in the past, but nothing really ever came up. I don't think I ever put on my full, investigative reporting hat. But I did feel that when I was heading up to New York this time, I knew I was going to have some extra time on my hands. And so when I was packing my bags, I ended up packing that article with me and was determined to either track him down or, track down maybe his family member. In all honesty, I really wasn't sure whether or not he would still be alive. I knew his age because of the article. He was 38 when he rescued me, which means that he would be 75 today. And, there were a lot of variables. I didn't know if I was going to come up with anything. Right. Maybe I had waited too long to track him down.
And then how did you track him down?
So I had actually gone by the firehouse about a week prior. I rode my bicycle over the Williamsburg Bridge and went and checked out the ladder company that had rescued me, but all the firehouse doors were closed.
Everything's closed.
There was a big sign on the door that said no visitors allowed, and I didn't see, I kind of peered through the window and didn't see anybody. And I just decided today wasn't the day. I kind of continued on my bike ride, and I went by the old loft and, took some pictures there. And then I just went home. And for whatever reason, I really do feel like the entire time I was in New York, there was a greater hand at play, who put the right people in my life at the right time. And it wasn't the right time to pursue it. So about a week later, I was at work at the hospital in Brooklyn, and like most nights, food was delivered to the emergency department. I will say I don't think I had to buy dinner a single night that I worked. The people of New York were amazing. They donated food to the hospital almost every single night. They would do a salute to healthcare workers every night at 7:00. It didn't matter where you were in New York.
I did see that on the news. I mean, and on friends' Facebook feeds, all that cheering and all the ringing of the bells every night at 7. What a wonderful tribute to all of you guys.
Yeah, it was really, really heartwarming. And so one night, some firefighters had delivered some pizza from L&B Pizza in Brooklyn. And we had kind of got word that there were some firefighters out front by the triage desk that just wanted to say thank you. And if we had a minute to just go out and kind of pay respects. And so I went out and said thank you, for the pizza, but then they were leaving and I followed them out into the ambulance bay and kind of shared my story briefly and said, I was born in New York and I was rescued by this firefighter back in the early 1980s and I'm trying to track him down. And what would the best way to do that be? Is there some, massive database or where's the best place to start? And they all agreed that the ladder company that he was associated with would be the best starting point. And one of them had all of the phone numbers of, the current captains of the firehouses on his cell phone and said, oh, he's with, ladder 20, no problem. Here's the number. And I jotted it down. And when I got off that morning, I sat down and gave a call to the ladder company.
And so you reached the chief. I mean, was anybody there? Because, all the offices were closed, but I guess somebody would be answering a phone.
They were all open. They just, the doors were just closed. They weren't doing tours. Some of the larger fire stations sometimes do tours and let people in and, check out blood pressures and things like that. But I think they were just had the doors closed for the public at that point, but they were obviously there to answer calls. So
were you a little bit nervous when you made the call? Like, oh my gosh, like here is the moment that I've been kind of thinking about for all these years?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was a little nervous. I really didn't think that it was going to lead anywhere. Like I thought this was just the first step of probably what was going to be a bunch of calls. I certainly wasn't expecting to get an answer so soon, but a younger firefighter had answered the phone and quickly transferred me to the captain of the station. And when I got on the phone with him, I briefly shared my story and said that I had been rescued in 1983 and I was trying to reach the firefighter. And he said, oh, what's his name? And, when I mentioned Eugene, he immediately, you could tell in his voice, he just got really excited and said, oh, I know Gene. Gene still stops by the firehouse all the time. This is such a great story. I actually have his number on my cell phone. So that, as soon as we hang up here, I'll give Gene a call and I'm sure you'll be so happy to hear from you. And I mean, my heart just kind of skipped a beat. I couldn't believe that it was that easy.
Oh my gosh. So then you hung up with him and then just waited by the phone. And did he call you right away?
Yeah, I mean, so I hung up the phone and I didn't know when he would call. Obviously, I gave him my number. I had been up all night working, and so part of me just had laid down to get some sleep. Because I was working the next night, and about 40 minutes later, my phone rang, and it was Gene.
Oh,
yeah,
how lovely. Was he just thrilled to have heard from you? And were you so thankful? It must have been difficult to even get the words out.
Yeah, it was a really touching moment. I don't think either one of us ever expected to have our paths cross again. And it was really emotional for both of us. I had a chance to say thank you. And, he asked about, my story and what I was doing in New York. And, when I shared with him that I was, helping out with COVID, I think he was really touched. He ended up receiving the Walter Scott Medal of Valor for the heroic measures that day back in 1983. And the lieutenant who put him in for the award had actually just passed away a few weeks ago from COVID. And so that really touched my heart. And so I think there was just kind of an extra level of appreciation there. But it really was. It was a very emotional day for both of us. I've spoken with his wife, Nancy, since as well. And She said that he got off the phone and he kind of cried all day,
Oh,
as did I.
that's so sweet.
Yeah.
Well, it's really, it's almost like kind of come full circle. He rescued you, and now you've been rescuing, patients, and it's been your calling in life. I mean, do you think that what happened to you when you were so young, knowing that that's what happened to you, and that, you had this wonderful firefighter who saved your life, did that kind of inform your life choices as you were growing up and deciding what to do for what you wanted to do as a living?
I don't know. I've been asked that question a lot recently, and I'm not sure, but I know I've always had a heart for service. I've always felt the need to, make an impact in some way. I think that's what initially drew me to the military. And when trying to figure out, what to do next, I knew that I needed to have the opportunity to continue to serve.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you really have just served so beautifully. I know that, and I think there was a picture shown of Gene sitting in his apartment with the article on the wall, and then when you showed me the picture, I recognized it right away. The Yankee Stadium, the seat from the old Yankee Stadium before it was renovated, and you're a Yankee fan, and Gene is a Yankee fan, and I think you had mentioned that you guys might try to catch a Yankee game together again. Obviously, you couldn't see each other in person because of the virus right now, but plans to.
I would love to have the opportunity to give, Gene a big hug. And we had talked about potentially meeting at the firehouse, but, he's 75 years old. I'd been working, and had been exposed to the virus every day.
Sure.
And the last thing I wanted to do was put him at risk. And so we decided that we would, need to wait to meet in person until things had settled down. But yeah, we had a lot of similarities, a lot of things in common. We were both happy to find out that the other was a Yankees fan and didn't cheer for any of those other teams out there. And so, people had asked him, did you know who she was? And you'll see in that picture, he said, how would I not know who she was? I walked by her, her face every day for the last 25 years.
Right.
He had, the article from the Daily News framed on his wall.
Right. Well, and he won the Medal of Valor. I mean, they don't just give those away. And
they don't.
He probably thought, he probably felt pretty thankful that he happened to be there that day to be able to save your life. So, that's just such a heartwarming story, Deirdre. Oh my gosh. I really love to hear about that. Now that you're back home, how was your reentry coming back home? And I mean, it's so you had culture shock going up there, and now a little bit of culture shock almost coming back to, of course, your familiarity. But it has been a while, and I'm sure your husband and your children were just overwhelmed with joy to see you come back home.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to be home. I missed my family tremendously while I was gone. I've never left my kids, for this long. I was gone for a total of 8 weeks. So it's been really nice to be home. Yeah. But I did bring home a little surprise for that.
I was about to ask about.
Yeah, I kind of joked saying like the quickest way to make your kids forget that you left them for 8 weeks was to bring them home a new puppy. So, so we added a new family member to the Taylor clan, and I picked up a new puppy about a week before my assignment in New York was over, and managed to keep it a surprise for them. So, within a few minutes of coming home, we had them out back and revealed the big surprise.
Oh, that's so sweet. Well, happiness is a warm puppy, right?
Absolutely. And we named her Brooklyn, which is,
which is perfect. Absolutely perfect. Yeah. Well, that's just, a happy ending to a happy story. Thank you so much, Deirdre, for coming on and sharing your wonderful story with us. Thank you for your service as well, for going up and helping New York when it was really on its knees and needed help, and you just didn't even hesitate. You went up there. I thank your husband and your children for allowing you to head up there and do that incredible work that you did. I'm glad you're back home safe.
Thank you so much.
Sure thing. And come back and visit us again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Terrific, Deirdre. Thank you so much. Take care.
You too.
Well, that was ZTV News for tonight. Boy, that's a really moving story. I'm just so happy for Deirdre. I hope everybody else enjoyed hearing that story as much as I did. And that's it for ZTV Live tonight. Again, our guest tomorrow night will be Sharif El-Sheikh and Casey Hogan talking about Meals of Hope that they've been delivering through Toast and Taste. And it's a wonderful community partnership program here in Alexandria that I'm looking forward to sharing with you. So with that, we'll say goodnight for tonight. And as much as you can, be the good news in someone's life.
I do.